the vertical, rollkur, deep and round. These are all variations of the same thing. A horse severely on the forehand and overstretched in its musculature and its skeletal system. Let's run through each cervical vertebrae's anatomy. C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, C6 and C7. These vertebrae are all attached at the back of the horse's skull and a joint we call the occiput or the occipital atlanto joint. Interesting fact about this junction between the skull and the cervical spine, it has a range of motion of only 27 degrees, while the other cervical joints have 3 degrees. These are the articulating process joints, commonly known as the APJ, and they're a very important little joint because they go both sideways and up and down. Let's take a look at what I would term a classical collected position with the pole at the highest point, and we can see the atlanto-occipital joint here, and I have got a black piece of pipe simulating what the spinal cord would be doing. Now you can see here that between the atlas and the axis there is in fact a weak point between these two vertebrae with a small piece of nuchal ligament below the funicular portion of the nuchal ligament. Here is the crest of C2. This is what commonly you will see as the highest point when a horse is behind the vertical or in a rollkur position with the funicular portion of the nuchal ligament flicked to one side. So remembering that our atlanto-occipital joint only has 27 degrees of motion, I'm about to show you what that looks like. Now obviously in a skeleton this is not going to move as freely as it would, and please note that the cervical spine is off of a different horse than the head is. The range of motion in this joint is limited by the paracondylar process you can see out on the side here. Next, taking a look at the joint between the atlas and the axis, and again you can see the spinal cord is exposed through here, and just looking at how the spine all reacts to one another when the axis is tilted left and right. Now obviously this isn't a movement that a horse would do very often, but think shaking neck type thing, and if one moves they all have to move. Next, looking at how well the APJs are aligned when the horse is in a forward and out position with the pole still higher than the withers. So this is what I'd be aiming for in a nice relaxed posture. You can see how well the APJ joints are aligned. While viewing this next clip, I'd like you to remember that 3 degrees is the natural range of motion that the APJ joints and generally the cervical spine can achieve. In dressage horses, arthritis of the APJ joints in the cervical spine is the most common place to have breakdown. You can see here displayed how far apart those APJs are being pulled in this position. The lower cervical spine ones aren't too bad, but most of the problems we're finding are in the upper cervical spine. Again, looking at the same posture, rollkur behind the vertical, and we're looking at the APJ joints and how well they are matching. Now, it's no surprise to anybody that horses are designed to be grazing, and that is when their neck is best aligned when they are in a grazing posture. So something that's really important to remember is that horses are not designed for humans to ride. That is something we have adapted them for. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't ride horses. I do not believe in that at all. But what I do believe in is that we should understand the anatomy and what is possible and healthy for a horse to be doing. There's a lot of good we can do for a horse's body, but not if we disregard the anatomy of the horse's body. Let's take a look at the nuchal ligament, which is basically a huge rubber band for the horse to recoil its head up quickly from a grazing position. Now, under load, the problem here is that when the horse is in a behind the vertical or rollkur position, the nuchal ligament is under load, particularly the funicular portion, which flicks across the top of C2, where a bursa is. Okay, so we're just trying to demonstrate what would happen when you have the horse behind the vertical, focusing on the structures themselves, and you can very clearly see that the horse has a broken neckline, meaning that C2 is higher than the pole, and we're just trying to demonstrate what happens to the funicular part of the nuchal ligament. So, yeah, over top. So, Sen, if you just put that on top of the, yeah, so you can see how much load that would be under. There's meant to be a bursa in between here, and that's where you would get your nuchal bursitis. And then, Sen, if you let that go, what happens to it? Yeah, it flicks over. And I'd just like to point out that we don't even have the horse flexed. So, Sen, if you pick the horse's head up towards me, yeah, it flicks round. Yep, and then pop it down. So lay it down, and we'll just have a look at it in an outward position. And so you can see how much weakness there is here. The funicular part attaches at the back of the skull and then has no connection all the way back behind C2 and the crest of C2. The lamellae part of the nuchal ligament mainly attaches up to the crest of C2, and then you can see we've got some attachments down the neck, so it'll be C2, C3, C4 and a little bit to C5, and then no connections all the way back here until the lamellae part connects up at the withers, and then the funicular part goes in to the top of the withers and becomes supraspinous. The next important thing to look at is the effect of the nuchal ligament, the funicular part, on the back of the skull. Here we have a normal skull on the left. This is the nuchal crest where the nuchal ligament attaches. On the right we have the mare that was used earlier on in the video for the skeletal portion of this video, and she's showing osseous changes where there's been micro traumas where the nuchal ligament has been pulled away from the base of the skull. This was a Western riding mare and she was ridden very deep behind the vertical. And this is the funicular portion of her nuchal ligament, displaying historic nuchal bursitis, where the funicular portion of the nuchal ligament has been rubbing on the skeletal structures below it, causing aggravation and then a swelling, and later on you can get this mineralization or calcification of the nuchal ligament. And just a view of that nuchal ligament again, attaching at the base of the occipital nuchal crest at the back of the skull. So the last thing to discuss is the muscles attached to each of the vertebrae and how they interconnect to one another. You can see here through the bridging of each vertebrae that when they are stretched, we see the same sort of microtraumas as we do in the nuchal ligament, and the body's response is to lay down osseous bone growth. I hope this video has given the viewers an all-round view about why there is such a protest against riding behind the vertical and rollkur and forced hyperflexion for the horse. Behind the vertical.